Hi, Gene Monterastelli here, the editor of tappingqanda.com. The video that you are about to watch is a conversation that was a part of this year's 24 Hours of Tapping. The 24 Hours of Tapping is a fundraiser for the amazing work that is done by the Peaceful Heart Network. The Peaceful Heart Network has brought tapping to migrants, refugees, prisoners, and the underprivileged in over 30 countries all over the world. As you watch this video, if you learned something, if you were touched by it, if you were inspired by it, the easiest way to say thank you is to support the work of the Peaceful Heart Network. To do that, all you need to do is go to 24hoursoftapping.com/support. And as you look in the description and the first comment down below, you will see a direct link to that. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Kristin specializes working with shame. In fact, she considers herself to be a shame worker, walking beside clients on their reclamation journey by using EFT to unlearn toxic shame. Based in London, but originally from New Jersey, Kristin is passionate about working with clients internationally, a value that reflects her contemporary experience in an increasingly borderless world. She's currently on the board of trustees of EFT International, and her healing practice is called the Yew Tree Integrated Healing. Please welcome to the 24 Hours of Tapping, Kristin. Hello.
Hey, Gene.
How are you today?
I'm very well. You're holding up well, I have to say.
It is a facade. We're going to pretend that I'm holding up well. It is lots of caffeine and an amazing team on the other side of this wall that's making all of this happen. So we're getting there. So one of the things that I've been doing as we've been having these varied conversations over the course of these 24 hours is just starting from a place of common vocabulary. Because, as we talk about where you live and where I live, we often say two countries separated by a common language, as we can say the exact same word and mean completely different things. And even in my own community, I can say something one way and mean it somewhere else. I would love, just as a jumping off point, when you're using the word shame, what do you mean by shame? Does it have a relationship to guilt, regret? Like, I'd love to kind of have a starting point. So as we're having this conversation, we're talking about the same thing.
Thank you for asking it. It's a really, really good question. Actually, how you set it up is exactly the right way to set it up. And you kind of nailed it, because actually shame is shame, but there's a spectrum of shame. And so I'll start by kind of giving my definition of shame, which is a fairly universal one, although I tend to change a few words than one you'd find in most articles say. So I would define shame fundamentally as the possibility that there might be something irreparably rotten, wrong, immoral, flawed, broken, evil, unworthy about us. There's a spectrum of shame, so it goes all, and I'll talk more about this as we go along, but I'm sure. But the spectrum of shame goes from healthy shame at one end all the way down to toxic shame, which most of us would associate with shame. When it gets to that really far end of the spectrum, and again, we'll talk more about this, that's when it becomes a core belief. Now, notice, not a limiting belief. I want to reframe that. It becomes a core belief. And once it's a core belief, shame kind of becomes shame with a capital S. And it's what we might call a shame-based identity, or sometimes people might hear internalized toxic shame. That's kind of a slightly different ballgame. And that tends to be what I work with, although you have to go through lots of loopholes and a whole spectrum of shame before you get there. But coming back to how you framed that, I think it's really equally useful and equally important to also identify what shame is not. And you said it, shame is not guilt. It's not regret. It's not embarrassment. Those are kind of, you can say that they're in the family of shame. I would say they're shades of shame. But guilt is the one I really want to hone in, because that's what people always say. That's the most common euphemism. I feel guilty. When people say, and when a client is booking and they say in the new client form with me, oh, I feel guilty about this, I'm like, right away, I'm like, okay, I know where this is going. But I also know that that's my sign to go very slowly, because it means if they were ready to say shame, or if they could identify it, they would have said it. So guilt is, and I'll just kind of define them differently. Sometimes we come across these meanings of like, oh, guilt is I've done something bad, shame is I am bad. That is absolutely true, but it's somewhat reductive. Shame is, let me start with guilt. Guilt is when we've done something, but we can atone for it. We can repair it, right? It's actionable. Guilt is when you feel guilt in the body, it's mobilizing. So it drives you to anger. It drives you to action. Sometimes it can drive you to anger too. Shame is very different. Shame is, first of all, neurologically, it's a freeze response. So we contract when we feel shame. It's a really good way to tell, do I feel guilty or do I actually feel shame? Well, what's your body doing? Say both words and see how your body reacts. With shame, we lose the ability to discern between the self and the origin of the shame. With guilt, we can retain the ability to discern between the guilt and the action, what happened, and myself. So there's a really important difference to understand there. And then when we often think of shame as like the opposite of shame is shameless or pride. Both are actually not true. Shameless is another manifestation of shame. It's a lack of healthy shame. It's a lack of boundaries. Pride is not quite the opposite. The opposite of shame is actually self-esteem. And we can talk more about this as we go along, but that's kind of how I would start with when we talk about shame. It can mean a lot of things. Well, sorry, it means one thing, but it can be on a spectrum of intensity, really.
And so one of the things that I find interesting in those definitions that you were saying there is you talked about, well, if they describe it as a particular way, I feel guilty about this, that becomes a signal to you about what the path forward looks like.
Mm.
Why or how is that a red flag, a key, a piece of information that's conveying more than a sensation, but context or state or something that when you hear that, where do you start? Why do you start that way? What is the difference between making those approaches when you're thinking about that?
Yeah, so something in doing this work, I like to say I'm extremely passionate about normalizing shame, but more specifically, I'm really, really passionate as far as therapists and healers and coaches and everyone goes, practitioners go, about shame awareness in the same way that we all like to be trauma informed, trauma aware. We all need to be shame aware also. Shame, again, I'll talk more about it, but shame is a really unique experience. Shame is completely different. It's not, sometimes it's an emotion, sometimes it's not an emotion, as we already said. And I work with trauma too, but I would actually argue that you need to be more careful with shame than you even do with trauma. Shame is really, really wily, but it's very adept at hiding and it thrives in the shadows. And the moment you put a spotlight on shame, it will do anything to hide itself because it can't exist when it's in the spotlight. It can only exist in the shadows. And shame does not go down with a fight. And this is the biggest fight you've ever seen. So I started to learn very early on how to proceed with caution because as I was starting to notice, first of all, I was getting a lot of clients in that would say, I've spent years in therapy, but I don't really feel better. Or actually I did, I cleared a lot, but there's just something hanging on. And when we get down to it, it was always shame at the bottom of it. And I was like, this is really bizarre. So, as a novice, I'd go into it and I'd start using the S word and start throwing it around. And I'd go, oh, is it possible that it's shame there? The ab reactions that I initiated just by using the S word too early, I can't even describe. I mean, I've worked with deeply, deeply traumatized people who haven't had this kind of reaction. I mean, like full-blown hysteria sometimes. And I thought, oh my God, this is so misunderstood, shame. Like, why wasn't I ever educated about this? So I had to understand it. And I kept doing research and I kept doing research. And the more and more, and the deeper down the rabbit hole I went, it was like in flashing neons, proceed with caution. Because if shame, which is different from the self, but if shame feels like it's about to be exposed, it will make someone quit therapy. It will make someone quit. They will self-sabotage. They'll lash out in rage. There's all these effects, right? They cannot be exposed. So you have to go almost on the periphery, which is how I started developing this idea of shame work that I do. You've got to go super slow on the periphery. If someone's saying guilt, let's talk about guilt for a little while. And eventually, as you start to see them become more comfortable, then you can start to introduce other concepts, the S word, all these things. Sometimes it never comes up. I do a lot of content-free work. Sometimes we never even talk about it, but we both know it's there. And if that's how it's going to stay, then that's okay. But we both know what we're doing. It doesn't, you know, I could talk about this for hours, but basically.
Well, I mean, what you've done is you said a lot of things that it is not. So then what is it? Like you're drawing the lines around it, and I have not gotten there to figure out what you're drawing the lines around yet.
So, okay, so let's see. So shame, how do I put it in other words? Shame is kind of, and I've heard you say this before actually in other contexts. Shame serves an evolutionary purpose, so it's not completely useless. Shame is basically what keeps us in the very early days of the tribal kind of society. It's what kept us safe. It's what kept us alive, because shame became the boundaries where if we broke those boundaries, if we crossed those boundaries, we would be shunned from our tribe, right? And at a certain point, being rejected and shunned from your tribe was certain death because you couldn't survive on your own. So as much as we like to think the human brain has evolved, it hasn't in some ways. It's still quite primitive. So the sense of shame, if we feel impending shame or that we are being shamed or we feel ashamed, it can feel like death to the body, to the nervous system. It perceives death, which is why you go into this freeze state and this contractive state. So shame is the most, some people would disagree, but I argue shame is the most painful experience a human can have because it is the closest thing to death that we will feel. Shame is the rejection. It is it's a sensation in the body that something is irredeemably wrong with me. There is nothing more painful than that. Am I clearing this up at all, or
Yeah, I apologize for being dim.
No, you're not.
This is. I mean, because we're getting
complex.
close, because we're getting closer. Because I mean, so like it. So there is a difference between, I guess, as I'm trying to process this and put vocabulary around it. There's a difference between me being judged as something and me being irredeemable. And when you like, and I could like when you use the what, like if I put that framework on it, judgment implies an interpretation from the outside. Irredeemable, if I'm using the word the way you're using it, implies it is a static state that cannot be changed. And so not only am I on the outside, there's no way that that gap can ever be bridged again, because it's something that is ruined, that like I can't unrotten an egg. Like once an egg is rotten, it is stuck like that forever, and it is now in that state, and there's nothing I can do with that particular thing.
You're exactly right. And it might help at this stage to think about that spectrum of shame I referenced. So shame, not all shame is that core shame, that shame-based identity. That's the worst kind. That's the most difficult to work with, the most damaging. But shame, there's healthy shame here. Healthy shame is, which here being the okay side of shame, actually, because it does serve a purpose. Healthy shame is what we really should be teaching children. It's where we, in a gentle and compassionate way, we show someone where boundaries are. So we show them how not to cause overt harm, physical harm, theft, sexual harm, those sorts of things. That's all healthy shame, and that's good because we need that to be functioning members of a society and in a safe society. Then you move down the spectrum, there's some embarrassment, which is about exposure. That's about being, maybe it's about being exposed for something that's that you're not proud of or that you don't like, you're rejected in yourself. Or maybe embarrassment is like a minor social rejection. Maybe it's like a threat potentially of being rejected, kind of. And then you move down the line and you keep going, all these colors of shame that are words we're very familiar with. And then you get to that ashamed, and ashamed can be a few things. Ashamed is, I'm feeling ashamed because this happened to me. Maybe I'm partially responsible for that. So maybe I was abused. Maybe I could list a bunch of the scenarios where we hold ourselves responsible, but actually, a lot of trauma comes with ashamed also. Something we did, something we didn't do, a decision we made that we wish we had made differently that actually did cause harm, but maybe we can't see a way to atone for that. Maybe we did something that could be causing guilt, but the guilt has actually turned to shame because there's no way for us to atone for it. Maybe we were driving in an accident, we killed someone. How can we ever atone for that? It was an action, but it turns into guilt. Maybe we're guilted so long through something like parental guilt, it's the most obvious example, that eventually it turns into shame over a long enough period of time. Then at the far end of the spectrum, you get to that internalized core shame, which is a shame-based identity. And that's when you cannot tell the difference between yourself. So you become shame. You just are shame. You're a shameful person. And that's what you're talking about. So in that state, that often it's not a rule of thumb. It's not always, but it very often appears with abuse survivors. And big T trauma survivors, complex trauma survivors, abuse, addiction, incarceration. I spent, a few years, many years ago in the prison system. That was my first taste of shame ever. And I realized, oh gosh, this is all shame. So you could go on, but that's kind of, you're exactly right. Like you're getting there.
And so in that scenario, I'm trying to figure out if they are the same, if they are different in the experience where there is I don't know if active and passive is the right word, but there are instances in which I did something, like the example you gave of I am a driver and I kill someone, I injure someone, I maim someone. That for me, that feels like that is active because I'm taking action versus something where I am receptive, where I have been attacked in some way, and it is someone else's action that has broken me in such a way that I feel like there is no turning around from that particular thing. Like, is there a distinction between those things and how it impacts me? Is there a distinction in your taxonomy and thinking about what that experience of shame is? Or is it doesn't matter if it is active or as receptive, how I'm perceiving it is the thing that defines it.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, I'm going to say, maybe some would disagree with you. I'm going to say, no, I don't think there really is a difference. Once it gets to a certain point and it becomes internalized. So other ways it can become internalized is that we don't process it. We feel a lighter end of the spectrum. We feel embarrassed. We feel ashamed of something. And instead of processing it, instead of looking at it, instead of talking about it, we keep it hidden. And that long enough, we ruminate on that long enough, and it just on its own becomes part of us. It gets deeply ingrained into our nervous system. We develop the physiology of shame. Maybe we walk around hunched. Maybe we avert eye contact, all sorts of signs of shame. But at some stage, no, it's really all the same. Once we kind of pass the point where it's almost, once we pass that sort of stage of not having processed it, and it's become internalized, it's exactly the same. I think, in my experience, it is, and when I work with it, exactly the same way.
And I mean, on some level, like when it comes to doing intervention of any sort, in a lot of cases, it doesn't matter how I ended up. It doesn't matter how I ended up in Camden, New Jersey. I'm in Camden, New Jersey, and I need to deal with that in some particular way after I'm dealing with that. So then, and I don't want this to feel like a super obvious question, like, why is that bad? Or maybe that's the wrong way of asking it. What is the consequence of that badness?
Yeah.
Because there are lots of things that are bad, and how does that impact the person, physical, emotional, relationship? Like, what are the cascading effects that come from that particular experience?
Yeah. It's a big question, and it's one I get all the time. Like, why are you obsessed with this? Who cares? I care because I think I really, and I would hold my corner with this. I think shame is the root of all harm. And what makes it so dangerous, and what makes it the root of harm, I think there's a few things we could identify, right? So one, what could be more tragic than a rejection of the self? by the self, which is
Mhm.
shame, right? I mean, that's just, there is nothing more painful than that. Also, shame is intrinsically kind of sinister because it is so slippery. It has this very unique protective mechanism called meta shame, and meta shame is the shame of shame. So that is what makes us, when we talk about shame, when we hear the word shame, it's what kind of makes us go, and we kind of feel that dirtiness. That's meta
Mhm.
shame, and it stops us. It's a very effective protective mechanism, and it stops us from getting close enough to examine it. That's pretty dangerous as far as an internal process goes. Also, the cycle of shame, it, actually related to that, shame is also what I call a shapeshifter emotion. It's a little term I came up with. This is the only thing I could think of. Again, because it's so adept at hiding, and this is why it's often missed also, shame often presents itself as physically tolerable, and I'd argue so more socially acceptable experiences. So shame very often wears the mask of rage, always rage, narcissism, perfectionism, addiction, shyness, righteousness, political kind of fundamentalism. So there's all these sorts of, it's not that we like those things, but they're more socially acceptable to talk about, and they don't feel as restrictive in the body. And guilt, of course, it often wears the mask of guilt. But fundamentally, the harm that shame causes is because of how shame works, the cycle of shame. Because shame is so painful, because it feels like impending death and rejection, it can't be repressed. We cannot repress shame. We think we can, but we can't. It has to be expelled somehow, and it will either be expelled by attacking ourselves. So we turn that in this we develop these deeply abusive conversations with ourselves. We engage in violent acts of self harm. We turn to substances. All the acts of self harm you can possibly think of. Right? We attack ourselves, or we attack others. And attacking others can look like abuse, becoming an abuser, belittling, controlling, um, rage, violence, all sorts of things, right? So when you look at the cycle of shame, so anyone who's causing any problem, right? Down from the person on the public transportation who's got their phone on speakerphone loud and doesn't care. That's shamelessness. That's shameless lack of boundaries. They don't care what harm they're causing. Down from the most violent criminal who's a serial sex offender. I argue, shame is at the root of that. It's the belief that I am absolutely irredeemable. So and what we do as a society is we shame that. But the cycle of shame just makes it worse. Once shame is exposed, again, it gets better at hiding itself. So we cannot shame someone into better behavior. We have to clear the toxic shame, because once toxic shame is cleared, then we can enter accountability. And then we can look at things without this nervous system freeze response to shame. So it's really dangerous. I cannot think of another thing that is more worthy to work on as a healer than shame.
And so I guess what I'm hearing inside of that is, if it's expressing itself as self-harm, it's,
Mm.
this is what I'm deserving and I'm worthy of. If it expresses itself as external harm, I am making sure that no one else can see the piece that is broken of me by knocking down everything that is in front of me and destroying it. And I hope that's not too crash and too simplified
No,
of like trying to understand that particular piece of it.
That's exactly, no, you're exactly correct. And I would even add, someone earlier I said was showing the emotional scale. I can't remember who it was. And shame is always at the bottom of the emotional scale. That, if you think of it as energy, shame
Yep.
is an incredibly dense energy. It just sits in you. It has to get out. We've got to get that out somehow. So it's also that attacking that expulsion of energy is also exactly that. It has to get out energetically. So it's exactly as you're saying, and there's also the need to do something with it. I've got to attack myself, or I have to attack it outwardly, or I have
And
to attack
so,
outwardly.
yeah. And so when we get to this far end of the spectrum that you're talking about here,
Mm.
how prevalent is that?
Shame. with a little s is, I'd say it's in 100% of people. It's that prevalent. Shame with a capital S, core toxic identity-based, shame-based identity rather, is more prevalent than we might think it is. The reason we think it's less prevalent is because it's really missed because of this meta shame thing. There's taboos about shame. Even I spent years studying mental health fields. I'm sure other people did too. Most of us shame never entered the conversation. I didn't learn about shame. So it's missed. If I was studying, if grief was my specialism, if eating disorders was my specialism, that's all I would see in a client. I wouldn't go deeper than that. So it's extremely prevalent. And I think anyone who works with shame is actually able to see how much more prevalent it really is. Is it the majority of society who lives in that state? No. But a lot of demographics, so a lot of people who struggle with addiction, a lot of people who violence is part of their story, again, abuse survivors, not all, but a lot of trauma and shame often go hand in hand. So you're talking about big populations of people who've had quite prevalent experiences. There's just no way that shame cannot be part of that. Doesn't necessarily mean they're shame-based, but I think there's enough of an indicator there and enough of a correlation that it's definitely worth not giving up until you see what role shame is playing there.
And so I guess the reason why I ask a question like that is, anytime I'm going to speak descriptively here, no clue about anybody else, but anytime that, like, for lack of a better word, I have a big new shiny toy, like something that is a complicated, sophisticated understanding of the human experience, it's really easy for me to be in a circumstance where I go into diagnosis mode.
Mm.
There's an old saw in medical school in the United States, because in other parts of the world this wouldn't work. But when you hear hooves, think horses, don't think zebras. When you're
Mm.
new to something and you learn about all the exotic
Mhm.
things, there's a
Mhm.
part of you that doesn't want to be dealing with the pedestrian. You want to be dealing with the
Mhm.
exotic.
Mhm.
And so when we're presented with something that is new and powerful and deep, as you're describing this particular thing, it can be very, very easy for you, like, me to, like, not diagnose, but overfind,
Yeah.
over expect, oversee something like that. And so that's just like, I just know my own instinct when I'm given new worldviews and how I want to, like, take it out for a spin to be as useful as possible. And so that's the motivation behind that particular question.
You're absolutely correct, and it's something that I even have to be really conscious of myself because in my early days, I was sort of, you're ashamed, it's shame, it's shame. I mean, I was like, all right,
Right.
shame this and
Yeah.
shame that. And actually, I've had to really stop. And that's kind of why I've said, if someone's saying guilt, I'm now okay with letting them. I'm not going to necessarily force them to talk about shame. If we're going in the right direction, I can see that we're doing the shame work and releasing it. Who cares? Why am I like, do I need to torture them by making them talk about shame? No. Like, I don't, and also maybe that's not there. Maybe it really is just grief. Grief is another master. Shame's called a master emotion, which I can talk more about. Grief is another one. Like, it can just be what it looks like on the surface. We don't always have to. So I always have to check myself, and I'm like, am I putting shame where shame is not? And that's why I kind of say, like, if I see these indicators, in these sorts of populations, I'm going to look for it because I know what to look for. But if
Mhm.
it's not there, then it's not there. And I have to walk away from that also, even though I'm attached to it.
Yeah. And so, like, I guess, as a metaphor, the way I think about trying to be a helper,
Mm,
because I think the problem that I'm trying to help is, that ball of necklaces that is in your jewelry drawer that you walked away for 3.5 days and somehow it magically turned into a ball, even though nothing moved in the entire universe and
yeah.
magically it doesn't, because
Mhm.
that's what cords and chains do. And so then, like, and because of my scientific process meticulous nature, I'm always been the one that you want to hand that ball of chains to, because I'm not going to break them. I'm going to be really meticulous. I'm going to find something that works. And so, like, when I'm being helper, I'm doing the exact same thing. Like, I really don't care which doorway that I'm walking into. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find the first loose bit that I can move to see if I can make some progress going forward in that particular way. Um, like, am I anywhere in the ballpark in what you're describing of like they show up describing it this way, therefore that's the door I'm walking into, or am I like, am I missing? Am I creating an analogy that is not fitting the way that you're describing this?
No, I think you are correct, and if I'm understanding you, which I hope I am, I'm not. I don't often kind of throw around like EFT terms and stuff, but there is one, the sneaking up on it, that I think is really key to shame work. You've got to sneak
Mhm.
up on it, but you also have to understand how it works in order to sneak up on it. And nowadays, I know enough to say that I just call it what it is, and I often work just content free. But I kind of arrived at that by sneaking up on it because I'd kind of see it like in reading something, when you're tapping on someone, you can read their body language, right? And if I can see in their face that something has come up when we're tapping, a memory or an experience, whatever. I can just see it. And then afterwards, you go, "Is everything? Anything you want to share? Anything you're noticing?" No, no. And you're like, I used to say, "Oh no, I know that's not true." But then I started sneaking up on it, and I said, I just want you to know, like, I think I forgot to say this in the beginning. You don't actually have to tell me necessarily what it is. You don't need to share your story,
Yep.
because if it's vivid in your mind, it doesn't need to be vivid in my mind, right? And I said, just tell me that something came up. And I started noticing that people were like, "Oh yeah, maybe there's this thing that I'm not quite ready to talk about." Okay, fine. Tell me how you're feeling. "Oh, I'm feeling kind of I don't know. Something about me is just feeling a little like." Guilty or dirty. And then I go, okay, so we just tap on that, right? So, and then gradually, ideally at the end of it, they can talk about it, but I don't care if they do. Like, it doesn't, I don't need it. So it's kind of, you're exactly, it's kind of like, and that's what I try to talk about it as like going around the periphery of it. And that's exactly what you're describing. It's like one little chunk at a time.
And as you're talking about this issue of meta shame, kind of one of the entry points that I love going into is the emotion about the issue. I have the thing, and
Yes.
then I have an emotional response to the thing.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
sometimes I have an emotional response to the emotional response about the thing. So I've done
Hmm.
something wrong. I feel bad. I now feel like I'm letting myself down because I'm judging myself because I've done this thing. And so, like, I'm just like, wherever the farthest ring out is, that's going to be the one that's going to be the gentlest one that gives me a chance to take a step closer to whatever is going on. Because I think one of the things is I think is I really agree with what you're saying there is like I don't have to understand. And in a lot of cases, the people I'm working with don't even need to understand. Like,
Yes, yes.
like there is a box in my office that I haven't opened in 9 months. Doesn't matter if I open it or not. I'm throwing it away. Like I don't have to know what's inside. I just now have space.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
sometimes I think that either consciously or subconsciously, on a subconscious level or a conscious level, there's a part of us that wants to understand so that I can prevent it from happening again.
Yeah.
And, I try to liberate myself from and hopefully help folks I'm working with to give them permission that sometimes there isn't a lesson that needs to be learned that is useful. And simply letting it go is enough for us to do. And so, like, just, I mean, to dovetail into the conversation we were having about 2 hours ago with John D about how we be more effective helpers, letting go of my agenda of having to understand is a really, really powerful thing that we can do in the healing process. And it can be scary, at least for me as a helper, because it feels like I'm missing a step. It's like it feels like I
Absolutely.
can feel like
Mhm.
and I can feel like, "Oh boy, I didn't actually leave every stone unturned, and I am not letting someone leave my space in a way where they're better off than I left them, that I thought that I've unraveled them and cleaned everything up, but I haven't. I've just unraveled them and I've left something behind." And again, that's my ego, that's my desire to be helpful, that's my desire to be appreciated and loved, but also my desire for my people to be safe as they walk away from me. And so that can be a tricky thing for us to be in a circumstance where to be able to do exactly what you're saying, I don't got to know, you know?
You're so spot on, and actually this is a really good example of talking about shame in kind of a more mild sense, and I don't mind using myself, right? So one of the things that I'm ashamed of as a healer, as a practitioner, when I started noticing that I was going to have to, if I was going to do shame work, I was going to have to do a lot of content free work. And I'd have to tell people. I couldn't just let it happen. I'd actually have to say, you don't have to you can come to me and say, I don't want to talk about
And,
my issue.
and, and could you do me a favor? I think I understand by context clues what you mean. Could you define content free work just so that
Yeah,
we're
sorry.
using common
Absolutely.
vocabulary here?
Yeah, absolutely. So content free, meaning you don't need to, what you can do trauma, you can talk about anything content free. Basically just means, I know you can use this with other modalities other than EFT tapping. I just haven't quite seen it, so I can't
Right.
really get my head around that. But specifically when talking about EFT tapping, content free would be, there's this thing, I had this experience, I kind of remember it, or maybe I do remember it, but right now I don't feel comfortable talking about it, or maybe I do not want to talk about it with someone, but I need to free this of my mind. Okay,
And
fine.
so yeah, so a perfect example of that is the wordless version of TTT. That is something
Yes.
that
Yes.
when they're
Yes.
working in settings where nothing is being spoken out loud, we're creating
Mhm.
transformation. I am teaching you a process. You are internally tuning in, getting as close that it
Exactly.
is comfortable and safe for you.
Mhm.
And that's as far as we go. Awesome. Okay, great. I just wanted
You're
to make sure that
absolutely correct.
I understood the vocabulary you're using as we stepped into
Yeah.
this.
Yes, and with tapping, I can even we can even get closer to it. And if I can just say, okay, are you comfortable just telling me what you feel? And we'll have a little conversation. And I can have a whole conversation with someone about a trauma or a shame memory or an abuse without even talking about it. And we
Right.
can just be like, oh, like my stomach's clenching, I can't breathe. Like, oh, yeah, I felt so exposed. And I'll say, I do a lot of continuous tapping, a lot of talking. So, what are you feeling? Did you feel exposed? Yeah, I feel really exposed. Okay, okay. Where are you feeling that now? Oh God, I can't breathe. Right. So it's a lot of, we're going along, but I have no idea what is going on in their head, and I never have to know. But part of me getting my ego out of the way was thinking as a practitioner, oh, but like if I don't know what's going on, then that's kind of depriving me of the juicy work. And like if I
Right.
can't sit with someone in their trauma, then like
Yeah.
am I really doing my job, or is that interesting to me? And I kind of I just had to say to myself, what is my goal here?
That's
Is
yeah.
my goal to entertain myself and to like feel like a martyr where I sat someone in their deepest, darkest trauma and their shame story? Or is my goal to release that with them?
And I also think that part of that, and we actually, Craig Weiner and I talked about this 14, 16 hours
Mm.
ago, is I also think part of that also is just like maturity as a practitioner,
Yeah.
where it's just like it's okay. Like I it's not that I need to feel the juice, but I can trust the process is enough that I can trust the process. The process is the
Mhm.
process. And we're gonna get there in the way that's going on. The other thing that I do, I'd be interested in your thought on this. Like in doing like when I'm doing some of that content free stuff, I like to like we're asking them questions. I like doing what I call a rule of three. And in my rule of three, what I do is if I think there is a culturally normative physical experience to it, I'm only going to give two examples of that. And then the third example is going to be something that is not culturally normative. So something as simple as tension. I might say tight chest, butterflies in your stomach, sweaty palms. Well, what I've just done is I have articulated things that are culturally normative ways for us to talk about what is going on. But if I say tight chest, butterflies in your stomach, or does it feel like your hair's on fire? Like very few people in the history of the world has described tension as their hair on fire. And I don't even think that's what the person is going to say, but
Yeah.
I'm giving them permission to not do performative clienting. Because
Yes.
sometimes, even when we're doing content free work, like, you see the silly meme, how was your therapy session? It was great. I made my therapist laugh 3 times. Like there's this part of us that like we feel like we want to do a good job for the person who's helping us as well. And so, like, not only are we sometimes having to let go of the desire to have the juice and the content, how to create a context that makes it safe and allows them to do that as well.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And this is kind of sometimes where, and again, this is always a thing where some people disagree. This is kind of where a little bit of self-disclosure can be helpful.
Mhm.
And as someone who's done my shame work, I will like if I can see, so as a, not to go down this rabbit hole too quickly, but shame is called a master emotion because it has a very unique property which is called a shame bind. And shame can latch on to another emotion, and anytime you feel that emotion, you feel shame automatically. A
Mhm.
lot of people experience this. They feel ashamed when they feel angry. When they experience any kind of pleasure or fun or giddiness, they feel ashamed. I know a colleague who, if she had a good weekend out, she'd come in on Monday and go, "Oh, Kristin, I got the shames," and I was like, "That's great," and it's bound. Um, what was I talking about? I completely forgot and lost my train of thought. Why were we talking about shame binding?
We were talking about like the experience of doing something like this content free and not feeling like I have to have the story as the person who's been going through that thing.
Yes. Anyway, I completely lost my train of thought there.
That's
That's
okay.
because
Okay.
talking
So,
about the shame
so
guys.
just,
But
I just,
anyway,
so just looking at time, we got, 10, 15 minutes ish. Um, you give me a homework assignment. You want to do a little tapping. I'm happy to be guinea pig just so that we can have an opportunity because I think for something like this is a heady conversation because this is something that is complicated. And
yeah.
so maybe if we can do something
Ooh,
demonstrative as a way to be illustrative, that might be a
yeah,
useful way
absolutely.
for us to use the rest of our time here.
That would be great. So, okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do, if you're okay with it, I'll just describe it and then you tell me whether
Yep.
this is going to work and I'll add some caveats. If you can think of a time when there was something maybe you did or you did not do. So maybe there
Mhm.
was a vulnerable person, you didn't defend them, you didn't act, you stayed silent, whatever. Or maybe it was something you did do. Maybe you cheated on a test, maybe you cheated on a partner, something pretty mundane, right? Try to stay away from something that was done to you and
Yep.
anything kind of a sexual nature because we want to keep it safe. No matter how much work we think we've done in ourselves, shame hits differently, and shame, we just want to stay away from that. If you can think of something that you're really just not quite proud of, let's kind of do it. We can do it content free, or you can share it. It doesn't matter. Whatever
I
you.
actually, because you and I had a conversation about this
Yeah.
to set this up, and so I thought of something very, very specific, and I don't
Okay.
have a problem sharing some of the details about it, and we can go
Great.
from there. And like
Okay.
I know how to do this stuff in a public space, so I'm going to be able to hold boundaries inside of this,
Yes.
so we can do this safely.
Good.
So
Okay. So if you're comfortable with it, if you wouldn't mind just giving me a little synopsis of what it is, and then we
absolutely.
can take it from there.
Um, I made a really sarcastic comment
Mhm.
to a trainer of a workout class I was in a number of years ago, and she articulated within 5 minutes of how really hurtful my saying that was. That was not my intention, and 100% I understand how my words could have cut her so deeply.
Yes. Okay. And so you're feeling ashamed of that.
Absolutely.
Okay. So that's an interesting example of where what really should be guilt turned into shame
Mhm.
because all you had to do was apologize to atone for that. But actually, it's a good example because guilt turned into shame because you probably attacked yourself, is what I'm
One
guessing, right?
and I apologized
Yeah,
immediately, fervently, and I meant the apology, and
right.
does not
Yeah,
change what is going on here because you're exactly right. I know better than that is the story that comes
exactly.
from inside of me.
Exactly. That's a great place to start. Let's start there if you can. Right. We'll just do a couple rounds.
Absolutely.
Even though I still feel ashamed of that,
Even though I still feel ashamed of that,
I really hurt her.
I really hurt her.
Even though I apologized and I did what I could to make up for it,
Even though I apologized and did what I could to make up for it,
she was really hurt.
she was really hurt,
And I'm still ashamed of that.
and I am still ashamed of that.
But I accept myself and how I feel.
And I accept myself and how I feel.
All this time later,
All this time later,
I still feel ashamed.
I still feel ashamed.
I hurt her.
I hurt her.
Maybe I didn't mean to,
Maybe I didn't mean to.
but that kind of makes it worse
That makes it worse.
because I know better.
I know better.
Why did I do that?
Why did I do that?
I know better than that.
I know better than that.
I hurt her.
I hurt her.
I apologized and I did what I could,
I apologized and I did what I could.
but maybe she still remembers that.
Maybe she still remembers it.
I'm still ashamed.
Still ashamed.
I knew better.
I knew better.
I should have done better.
I should have done better.
Where are you feeling this in your body? Do you feel that shame in your body anywhere?
So it feels almost like toxic up the core coming out the mouth. Like it's all, it's not necessarily the throat, but it certainly feels lips and all in there.
Mhm. I can still feel the shame.
I can still feel the shame.
I can feel it in my body and my lips.
I can feel it in my body and my lips.
It's toxic.
It's toxic.
Last round. I'm ashamed.
I am ashamed.
I knew better.
I knew better.
I should have done better.
I should have done better.
And now I'm helping people.
And now I'm helping people.
But I hurt her.
But I hurt her.
Do I have a right to be helping people?
Do I have a right to be helping people?
I don't know, because I'm still really ashamed of what I did.
I don't know, because I'm still really ashamed.
So what are you noticing? How are you feeling?
So, and this is just the way things go. Last pit didn't land. Like, there's not that sense of, I don't feel like I deserve to do that particular piece of it. And I know exactly what that's like coming to those things. There's still this kind of like a judge banging in the head, did wrong.
Yeah.
But this has now just reduced to this.
Yeah.
Like there's like, and it wasn't even like like it's almost like an acid has been balanced out by a base where it just it didn't like go anywhere, it just neutralized is the way that I could feel that. It just like all of a sudden like took up less space until it's just kind of right in here.
So I'm conscious of time, but two things I'll just say to that. One, I injected that random statement because that's kind of an example. So sometimes when you're doing shame work, and you have to be very careful doing that, of course, but because with shame, talking about this being on the periphery, that like one thread at a time, sometimes I find it really helpful to insert a provocative statement to see how that lands. Because I want to see if it instantly bounces off, then I'm like, all right, great, we're cool, we're going in the opposite direction here. So it can be really, if you do it once in a while, so I'm really glad to hear it. And I'm glad for the feedback for you to be like, that didn't land at all. Good. The other thing, my question to you is, you feel what you're describing, so you feel less shame, which is great. You feel less shame. Do you feel any less accountable?
No.
Exactly the point. So we can release the shame and still hold ourselves accountable. Right. And now you can think with a clear head. So if in a different situation, by releasing that shame, that physicality of the shame, actually you can see the forest for the trees now. And you can think, okay, is there anything I can do for this? Like, what can I actually do to atone for this? Right. So we can clear shame without feeling guilty about clearing the shame.
Yeah. Well, good stuff. This is heady, hard stuff. And if I were going to do this conversation all over again, I wouldn't have done it after staying up all night. I would have done this front end, not the back end, just because. And that's not like, that's not a critique. That's just like I like that's talking about like the subtlety and the appreciation of going deep in this particular way. Like it's not only is it harder for us to bump into, but it's harder for us to do in a thoughtful and safe way for ourselves and the folks that we're being helpful with. And so, being so mindful of that and being so aware, like, there are things that I do not have to be in a perfect resource state in order for me to be an effective helper. There are things that I need to be significantly more well resourced in order to keep myself safe, in order to keep the people I am helping safe. And so, yeah, this is, eat your Wheaties before you do this sort of work. Like this is one that like we really need to be thoughtful and deliberate about the way that we engage with this.
It's true. It's absolutely true. Proceed with caution. First thing I said. Exactly. Proceed with caution.
Awesome. Well, excellent. Well, first of all, I appreciate the fact that like you have been working so hard, like to do this deep work, and to be so thoughtful about something like this. That anytime that we're like, it is easy for me. I don't know if it is easy. It is easy for me to have my ability, my perceived abilities outstrip my abilities and be cavalier about approaching something. And I appreciate the fact that the way you describe this, the work that you've done, the way that you're thinking about this, that it is very, very clear that you are not cavalier about this sort of work. And that, like after we had our conversation setting this up, I turned to my team and I'm like, oh, this is going to be a real one. This is between the personality of the person I just met and the topic that we're going to have. This is going to be a real one. And my team also knows that that was something that excited me a great deal. So thank you for doing this work, but also thank you for like wrestling with me as we try and understand this, as I was a little slow on the uptake because we're working our way through all of this.
It was a complete real life example, and this is how it goes. So thank you so much, and thank you for the vulnerability of it, because this is the deepest work you can do. So thank you so much for that.
Awesomeness. Well, Kristin, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
And hopefully the next time we get to London, we get a chance to hang out and we can actually do something in person. I would love that very much.
Oh, please. I'd love it. I'd love it.
Excellent. Very good. If you found this interview inspiring, I would encourage you to support the Peaceful Heart Network by going to 24hoursoftapping.com/support or clicking the link in the description. And you will see on the screen right now a playlist to all of the interviews from this year's and last year's 24 Hours of Tapping. I hope you enjoyed those as well.